I've been at both ends of the spectrum. I've had people be really, really cruel, and I've had people just be like some of the most amazing people that I've ever met have reached out because my comic has resonated with them in some way.
Hello, fellow Webtoon fans and creators. I'm Audrey, and this is the Webtoon Wave podcast. Today, I am joined by a really awesome guest. I'm a huge fan of her webcomic. She is the creator of the Barrier Scroll on Webtoon Canvas. Please welcome Jay. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about the Barrier Scroll and how you came up with the story and just everything.
Thanks so much. I'm probably going to talk a bunch about it because I'm super stoked about it myself.
So give us an introduction to you and how you got into webcomics.
I've always been a fan of comics and webcomics, and during the pandemic, actually, I started getting really serious about writing the Barrier Scroll, and it kind of turned into this whole big thing, and I started writing scripts for it, and eventually it turned into what you see today, which is the Webtoon.
Yeah, so how did you discover Webtoon?
Oh, I mean, I've always read comics. I've always read manga. I've always read like American comic books, and I fell into webcomics naturally. I think one of the first webcomics I ever picked up was the Whale Star, the Young Sung Mermaid. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that I loved that one. I got really like one of the first webtoons I got super obsessed with was what is the name? Ellen Solwa, I think is. Have you heard of that one by Cybelise? Oh, it's so good. I think I read that one on I want to say it was like on Tapas or something. But I got really I got really into webtoons and kind of just started tearing through them as soon as I discovered them, basically.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people's pipeline to webcomics is they either drew a lot when they were younger or they read a lot of manga or comic books in general, and then they discovered, for me, it's the opposite. I got into manga after webcomics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that was really interesting to me about I like what makes webcomics stand out actually, I think, is like the scroll format and how you kind of intake it on a mobile device. That is something that you just don't see in like traditional comics or in like manga or anything like that. And so the idea that you can kind of play with time and space and color, like, right, there's not a lot of, except for maybe like American comic books, there's not a whole lot of this kind of medium that's done in like full color either. So it's a very attractive way to kind of format the comic setting, basically.
Yeah, and it makes it more accessible and I guess easier to read in a way.
Oh yeah.
Since it's so like natural that people are already scrolling on their phone, watching reels or TikToks or whatever. So a
Totally.
webcomic scroll, very natural type of behavior.
Absolutely. It's like perfect for on the go. Absolutely.
So let's get into the story of the Barrier Scroll. Tell me what inspired you to create the story.
So I guess I can give you kind of a background of the story because I imagine that there's probably not a lot of people who are familiar with the comic. And then I can kind of talk a little bit about like the inspirations around the comic and how it kind of developed into what it is today. So the Barrier Scroll essentially follows the protagonist, Oriole. She's this young woman who has spent her whole life like keeping her rare magic hidden, right? But then she like reveals her abilities to protect somebody that she cares about, and she is quickly recruited by the Federation in this story. And so there's like two factions. There's like the Federation and the Empire. And I'm air quoting here, and I'm saying that the Federation are the good guys and the Empire are the bad guys, but that's up for interpretation later. But basically, she's recruited by the Federation, and she's placed under the escort of this group of elite soldiers, and they're called the Onyx Guard of the Federation. And basically, they're tasked with taking her to the city of Ball, where she's meant to kind of learn how to control her magic. And in exchange, she has agreed to basically help the Federation take down these powerful generals of the Empire called the Thaumaturgy. And, so she agrees to that. But I think also Oriole has like a goal of her own, right? And so she's searching for the Barrier Scroll, which is the title of the comic. And it is an artifact that she hopes will do a couple things. One, she hopes it will help to kind of prove her worthiness, but also I think she feels that with the scroll, she can give her father the life that she feels he truly deserves, right? And she believes that if she goes to the Empire, then that will be the key in her finding this artifact, essentially. And then among her escorts is the deuteragonist, who is Rin Al Ray, and he's this like battle-worn soldier who has a ton of baggage, and he's super haunted by his past. And so like as their journey unfolds and as they go on this adventure, Oriole and Rin are forced to essentially like confront their pasts and their sense of duty and whether or not that they can trust each other, when everything else around them is essentially like falling apart. So it's got a really good mix of action, adventure. There's some political intrigue in there. There's some juicy slow burn romance, which I love, and like lots of really good chunks of world building too. So it's got a little bit of everything. The inspiration, the inspiration for the Barrier Scroll, I think, was really born from, I would say, my love of like high fantasy storytelling. I just absolutely adore high fantasy storytelling, like deep character-driven narratives, the kind of adventures that kind of stick with you like long after you've read it, like Lord of the Rings, obviously that comes to mind, or like even like big expansive universes like Star Wars is like a really good example. So these are all like huge inspirations for me, but like I also wanted to explore heavier, mature themes like self-worth is in this story, retribution, kind of the weight of past generations' choices. Like these are all ideas that swirl around in this narrative. And like one of the really big core inspirations for the story was actually the barrier magic that Oriole possesses, because the magic in the story is defensive rather than offensive, right? So like in most fantasy stories, power is usually about destruction, right? But I was super fascinated with the idea of power as protection. And also there's kind of like a double meaning behind like the physical barriers, but also like the barriers we put up emotionally. Like, what does it mean to be strong when your strength is about, shielding rather than attacking? Like, how does that power define you as a person? That's sort of where Oriole's journey begins, right? Learning that her worth is not determined by like what others expect of her, but like the choices that she's going to make through her, throughout the whole story as she discovers more about like her abilities, essentially. I mentioned earlier that I really love stories with like strong character-driven narratives, so I really wanted the Barrier Scroll to have like a strong emotional undercurrent, which is where the romance between Oriole and Rin comes in. I love romance and storytelling. I know you do too. You're writing a romance, especially when it's slow burned, and and that slow burn is like really deeply entwined with the character's growth, right? This was really important for me. Like their relationship just isn't about attraction, right? It's about trust. It's about vulnerability, finding a connection in a world that's like constantly pushing them apart. How do they overcome that? How does that affect their decision making? I wanted to create a dynamic where like both characters challenge and complement each other, but also like the love story is naturally unfolding among like all the chaos that's happening to them too. And then I would say visually, like if we're talking about visual inspiration, like one of my most favorite comic book artists of all time is Michael Turner. Have you heard of him? Are you familiar with him?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So he has he passed away, unfortunately, a while back, but he's worked on a handful of series that really, I think, hooked me onto his art style. And the biggest title that he's worked on, I think, is or one of the biggest titles. He's done stuff for like DC and Superman and Batman and stuff, but the title that really hooked me was Witchblade. I don't know if you've heard of that, but like
Mm-mm.
Google him. His artwork is absolutely stunning, and I was super inspired by the work that he has done. Um, and then this is something that I say a lot when people ask me, like, how did you develop your art style? I'm definitely inspired by like 80s and 90s animation for, movies and series, like Never Ending Story. The
Mm-hmm.
stories back then were just so good. Like Never Ending Story, Labyrinth, The Dark
Love
Crystal.
Labyrinth. Oh,
Oh
love
my
Dark
God.
Crystal.
I know
Oh,
they're so good. We do not get stories like that anymore.
no, not
We really
anymore.
don't. But it's like I grew up in that time period where all the Disney, like the good Disney movies were coming out. Like what did we call it? Like, it was called like the animation renaissance or something like that, right? It was
Yeah.
like all, yeah, totally. I loved the visuals and the visuals and the storytelling in movies like Anastasia.
Oh, love
I
Anastasia.
love
So good.
Anastasia. Yeah, Prince of Egypt.
Oh,
Like
love it.
I know, I know. So, I mean, even the anime in the 80s and 90s was just peak. Like it was such a good time for
Oh, yeah.
animation.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I wanted my story, and I wanted the barrier scroll to really have that like expressive, like cinematic energy, where every panel kind of feels like it's a screen cap from a movie or a show or something. Like that's my goal. I don't know I don't know if that always comes off as the case, but it is my goal when I'm thinking about paneling and creating the story essentially.
Yeah. No, it comes through. That's one of my favorite things about the art style in Barrier Scroll is that it's so cinematic and there's like rim lighting, but then there's this atmosphere and then there's the special effects and then composing your panels. Like they're dynamic and they're really intriguing, and the pacing, how you transfer a moment to another. Like it's like very smooth and like you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean that's why I thought that Webtoon was a good medium for what I was trying to do, because like I touched on it a little earlier, but like the way that you can play with space and pause and kind of, as the user is or the reader is scrolling, and stretch it out and just make it look like it's a pan across, like as a camera would pan or something like that.
Hmm.
People do so much creative stuff with web comics, and like when I see something like that, I'm constantly like screenshotting it and putting it in my references folder. And I mean, my references folder is just chock full of all kinds of really cool cinematic moments, not just in like webtoons, but like in movies and in series and all kinds of stuff. So I'm inspired by like all kinds of mediums that have movement and feel cinematic, because I think that translates so well to the webcomic medium.
It really does. And taking inspiration from cinema or TV or wherever, I feel like translates really well with
Mm-hmm.
webcomics,
Yeah.
especially when you're thinking about composing panels. You could literally just watch, like, if you are creating an action comic, you could literally watch an action movie, see how they frame characters in a scene. Typically you have like an establishing shot at the start of an episode, and then you can get into all of the other framing. You can make panels really dynamic. So I feel like there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of similarities in film and webcomics. So if anybody is wondering how they can find ideas to compose panels, like just watch a show or a movie that's maybe in the same genre as like what your story is in, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of really good ideas you can get from doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm constantly like, it's weird too. Like if I'm watching a movie or a series now, I I don't know if you do this, but like I'll
All
log
the
stuff
time.
away. Yeah. like even for story and stuff, like I take moments from movies or series and I'm like, ooh, yeah, that was like that was the climax of this moment, or that's when this character's world turns upside down, or that that's the motivation. Like I'm constantly pulling those from like movies, or like you said, like the cinematic effects and how they are panning across a landscape or something like that, or how they like transitionary phases in movies and series too. Like I'm constantly just committing that stuff to memory so that I can try to translate that to my webtoon all the time, all the time.
Yeah, it's a really good way to go. I think, there's a lot of creative ways you can visually tell a story with webcomics, but I also think it's still a very limited medium because you are limited to a very narrow canvas. And, I've encountered this where I can't fit, like, I see a scene in my head, but I just can't make it fit on the vertical canvas because it's, more of a limited space. So I have to be like really flexible and try to be more creative with how I'm composing things. And it
Yeah.
can get, there's pros and cons, obviously, of doing webcomics, but there's also so many ways that you can get around the limitations of the canvas.
Yeah, totally. And to be fair, I do like some of the limitations because it guides some of your thinking a little bit, right? When the canvas is like too open and there's too much opportunity, I think it can be a little overwhelming at times. So I do appreciate some of the limitations around the medium as well, like the vertical scrolling. I totally get that.
Was being a webcomic creator something that you always wanted to do?
No, no, not at all.
Not at all.
No, no. So the barrier scroll was always meant to be a novel. Like it's
Mm.
outlined like a novel. It's laid out like a book. I thought I thought I was gonna write 3 books and then I would like self-publish and just and just go about my life. But when you read, I'm laughing because it sounds so ridiculous. When you read a lot of books, right, good books, you realize that writing is really hard. So I defaulted to showing rather than telling. But when I first decided that maybe a comic was a better route, my illustration skills were like non-existent. Like I couldn't really draw at all. I'd taken courses in college, like, for the degree that I was going after, you had to take drawing courses. So like I had a foundation, but like truly I had to teach myself how to draw.
Yeah.
Which I want to say was like back in 2022. It was like when we were coming out of the pandemic essentially. So I started drawing pretty consistently in 2022, and then by 2023, like a little less than a year after that, I started publishing some of my first episodes. But like we talked about earlier, I do think that the webcomic route just made more sense for me because I am always thinking about this story cinematically. Like, like even in my head where the characters like talking to one another, or like I'm imagining a scene, like I'm seeing it with like these crazy camera angles or like slow motion, or there's like depth of field or something. Like that's kind of just where my brain goes. So like aside from like an animated series or something, the webcomic medium just made the most sense for me, I think.
Yeah. Do you find that sometimes translating what it looks like in your head onto the canvas is harder?
Yes. All the time. And I don't know if that's just because it's like my lack of skill. I don't know if it's because of the what's defined within the space of a panel. I'm not really sure. I think that not everything cinematically translates to the page. So oftentimes I'll like draw something and it will just be terrible, and then I'll just remove I'll just remove that panel. I do a lot of throwaway work, so it's a lot of experimentation, I think, on my part, where I'll draw a panel and maybe it just doesn't make sense. It's like visually for the plot, it just might not make sense, and so I'll end up taking it out or saving it for later. Always save your panels. You could use them later, but It's a lot of experimentation, I think, to kind of get it right, like to get a scene right, you know.
Yeah. I think a lot of us creators, like webcomic creators, can relate to that. I mean, I struggle with it. I see things in my head and then putting them down on the canvas, it
Yeah.
doesn't look how it looks in my head. I'm
Never.
like, what's wrong with me?
It's never how you imagined it. I always have that problem. And I think for me, I think it's just a skill gap. You know, I haven't been drawing as long as you or other people. And so what I'm imagining in my head does not come through to the palette sometimes. So, but some people are like so good at it. So I just, that's why I work really hard to try to up my skill set because I feel like I'm already kind of behind everybody a little bit. So I'm always trying to kind of do stuff on the side to help level up a little bit. And I have a design background. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but I do have a design background. So I try to like if the if the panel that I've drawn kind of looks a little funky, I'll try to band-aid it with like good lighting or something, or like you know, a strategically placed word balloon or
Yep.
something to cover up like feet that aren't drawn very well or something. Like so I lean on my design background pretty heavily to at the very least, if I can't execute on it, to realize that something is off and cover it up in a way that kind of hides the imperfections essentially. So I'm pretty good at that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I am one of those people where I I don't know if this has been your experience. When I think back to when I first started,
Mm-hmm.
I was proud of like everything I made back then. Like
Oh
when
my
I was
god.
first drawing, I was like, wow, this looks amazing. This looks so good. And
Yes.
now I'm more critical than ever.
Yeah, no, I look back at my old stuff and I'm like, holy cow, what was I thinking? You know, but that's like growth too, right? Like
Mhm.
you're exercising growth and you're looking back at older panels and you're like, oh, holy Toledo, these look terrible. Um, but back, yeah, I'm with you. I'm right there with you. Like when I first made my first panels, I'm like, it doesn't get more cinematic than this. Like, you know? And then now I look at it and I'm like, wow, wow. So I don't know. It's nice to kind of have that retrospective though with your work though. I think it really shows growth for sure, which is good.
Yeah, and I think if there's any artists right now that are dealing with this struggle with maybe perfectionism, just know that it's just a sign of improvement. I mean,
Yeah.
it can be hard though, being a perfectionist and being a webcomic creator at the same time
Oh my God.
because we're strapped for time, right?
Yeah.
So you don't really have the time to be able to be a perfectionist with each panel. I think that's something that a lot of aspiring creators maybe don't realize is that when you're looking back at your old work and you cringe and you don't like it, it actually is a sign that you've improved a lot. You can see where the imperfections are, you can see what areas you were maybe not as skilled in that you were a lot better at now. But I also think that can lend itself into perfectionism, where we get
Mhm.
stuck in wanting panels to look amazing and perfect and just how we want them to, but we're more strapped for time. We don't have the time to be the perfectionist that we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I would consider myself very much a perfectionist, especially when it comes to like the world of um, things that are visual, right? And letting go of perfectionism, I think, was something that I had to learn over time because, um, you know, we creating a webcomic can lead you to be so strapped for time, essentially, right? Like whatever your release schedule is, whether you're doing weekly or bi-weekly or monthly like I do, um, you know, you have to kind of be cognizant of the amount of time you have to spend on like a panel or a group of panel or maybe a script that you're even writing, right? So you time box yourself in a way where you create something and you're like, it's good enough, You know what I mean? I know you know what I'm talking about, where you're like, this is good enough to communicate my idea. I'm going to move on. It might not be perfect, but it's good enough. And so that's kind of where my headspace eventually got to, but it took me a long time to kind of get to that point. And I don't know if you can see that in my older work, probably not, but I do feel that perfectionism is something that you kind of have to throw to the wayside in order to make sure that you're being an effective comic creator, essentially.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that you kind of have to pick which panels deserve the most attention,
Yes.
and then with the other ones that are less important, don't spend as much time on. And that's something that I've struggled with a lot, is I have spent too much time on panels that don't really need the amount of attention that I'm giving them.
Yeah.
I think with pacing in like the storytelling, maybe every 5 to 6 panels have a panel that's a little more interesting. Maybe that takes up more space or is more dynamic, and try to put more effort into those. And then the other ones, try not to worry too much about. Like, you want to keep the reader interested as they're reading, but a reader is only looking at a panel for maybe 1 to 2 seconds.
You're lucky, yeah. If you're lucky. If
Because
you're lucky.
they just want to read, right? They want to read the story.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I call them L panels and W panels, basically, like you're, you know, and so I try to make sure that I save my W panels, or like the high impact panels, for like really high impact moments in the narrative, essentially. And you can honestly, you could probably pick them out of every episode. I almost, when I'm going through and doing storyboarding, I'll say, yeah, this is a high impact panel. I'm going to spend a little more time. So like the high impact panels, you'll see me do things like rim lighting, or you'll see me do like highlighting, which I don't usually do on some panels, or I'll play with the lighting a lot more. So it just depends. But yeah, like especially the panels where like people are swiping through pretty quickly and you're just kind of communicating an idea, maybe like a character is walking from point A to point B. You don't really need to make that a W panel, right? But like there's a panel in one of my episodes where Oriole kind of comes into her magic for the very first time, and she makes like a barrier in the story for the very first time. And I was like, this has got to be a W panel. You know what I mean? So I made it like really big and really long, and I blocked her so that there's like the bonfire is behind her, and her hair's blowing. Her hair's always blowing, but like her hair's exceptionally blowing in this scene.
Yep.
And, you know, so I want people to know that those are the panels that they should spend a little more time on, rather than some of the panels where they're just kind of like swooshing by, essentially. So it's kind of a method of like communicating with the reader too, and like what they should be looking at more, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that trying to limit yourself to how much time you're spending on those other panels will save you in the long run.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So it's kind of a byproduct of the way that people intake this content too. So it makes sense. Don't bust your butt trying to make every panel look amazingly beautiful work of art that belongs in like the Smithsonian or something.
I have creators that will message me, and they have the same issues where they're like, it takes me so long to create an episode, but I want to release them weekly, bi-weekly, whatever. And I just, I need to take my own advice if I tell them, don't be such a perfectionist. Like, I need to listen to my own advice.
Yeah, do as I say, not as I do. I mean, I'm bad about it too. Like one of the last episodes that I did over like the Christmas break, and I was like, I'm gonna make every panel a W panel for some reason.
Oh no.
And it put me way behind, and I don't recommend it, but it's creatively, it's one of my most favorite episodes. It's like the one where they're traveling. It's like a travel montage, essentially, and
Love
there's
those.
not a whole bunch of like dialogue. So I was like, I gotta go ham on these panels. So I did, but it set me back hardcore, and so just that's a lesson. You just Don't make every panel a W panel for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's get into talking about the Webtoon creation process a little more specifically. I get a lot of messages from people where they're like, I want to start a webcomic, but I just don't know where to start. I don't know what I should focus on. What is the process? And I try to help them as much as I can, but I don't always have all the time in the world. But let's talk about the early stages of pre-production. What should a person who wants to start a webcomic start with first? When they get the idea of like, I want to start a webcomic, what should their next step be?
That's a good question. So luckily for me, because earlier I told you that I did the majority of the writing during like the pandemic. So luckily for me, the entire first and second season, so I'm doing like 3 seasons total of this comic. So the first and the second seasons are like completely outlined. They have the synopsis for each episode. Oftentimes I know what the goal of that episode is going to be. So I might have a significant portion of the dialogue already written. So if I don't, I'll go in and I'll write the script for that episode. And then I do like, I don't know if you do this, but like I'll do a read aloud to myself and I'll do like the characters' voices and stuff.
Yeah, make sure the dialogue doesn't sound weird.
Yeah, so it sounds like conversational and stuff. And if it sounds weird, I'll do some massaging there. If there is like a new character that's going to be introduced, I might do some, like experimentation around like character designs or like shape language. And then like there's a lot of determining like where the characters are going to be within the 3D space that I'm creating for them. Like, what is that going to look like? What is the vibe that I'm going to go for? How do I want people to feel when they read this episode? So things like that. And then if all of that stuff is done, then I go right into like production essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in my experience, what I did first was I just started planning the entire story. Not little beat by little beat, maybe just the main story beats. So I put down all of the story beats, all the things that I wanted to happen, and I literally just put them on sticky notes and I put them on my wall and I rearranged them to where
That's
it felt
perfect.
like they fit the best. And what I also did was I just looked up a bunch of tropes. I went to, I think it was tvtropes.com or something similar,
Yeah.
where they have like a crazy library of common tropes in film, anime, comics, books, that kind of stuff. And I was like, I know this is a fake romance story, so what are common tropes that go into this type of story? And I picked out ones that I really liked that I felt like worked really well with the characters and with the story that I had been trying to figure out. So that's a piece of advice I would give other creators or people who want to be webcomic creators is maybe just go based off of a trope that you really like and see if you can build a story around it.
That is really good advice because I think there's a ton of popular tropes out there. I didn't even know about that resource, tvtropes.com. I have a book called the Trope Thesaurus. I got it on Amazon. I don't actually know who made it, but it's called the Trope Thesaurus, and I have cracked it open a few times already.
Yeah, so if anybody needs some ideas of what kind of tropes, and tropes and cliches are different. Tropes are basically things that can kind of structure a story.
I love that.
So how did you come up with the world of the barrier scroll? Because everything is like really unique and really well thought out. And I'm really curious, how did you create the world around Oriole and Rin and the Onyx Guard, all of it?
So I think when I first started world building it was fairly small. Like I knew it was going to have the Federation, and I knew it was going to have the Empire, and I knew it was going to have opposing factions because, at the very end of the story, there's going to be this big war. That's not a spoiler. It's in the synopsis. But eventually I knew that I wanted these characters to go on an adventure on like a quest essentially, and I knew they needed to pass through places that would help build up the protagonist and the main character. So as I started to kind of do like character creation, um, the world kind of built itself around the character creation. So, like, for example, the Onyx Guard, each Onyx Guard is representative of a state in the Federation, essentially. And then there's 4 Onyx Guards total. It gets a little complicated because we have like capital cities, but we also have states. So I try not to mention the states and I focus more on the capital cities because that's where the characters are traveling. But then, you know, there's like different factions and stuff, and like we have the Huno, which are essentially these little humanoid animal characters, but then we also have like human shapeshifters, and they have their own city. And so like the world was built out of necessity of what was required by the narrative essentially. I knew that, like, for example, Rin was going to spend some time behind enemy lines because he gets captured prior to when the story begins. So I knew I needed to create a place where he was captured, essentially, right? I also knew that there was going to be events that happened prior to the story starting that would set this whole narrative in motion. So I knew that things needed to happen on the Empire side. And so there was like, you know, fortresses and places that I needed to build up on the Empire side. So it was all like narrative driven and character driven essentially. And then as soon as you start building out these characters, the world just gets like bigger and bigger. And like, it's not like I sat down and was like, okay, I'm gonna build you know, a place. It was like, here is a character and here is a place that helps define that character essentially. And so that's how the world eventually turned into like this really big thing. But like I love world building, and I even try to think about how these different places like interconnect. Like, how does the land of the beginning connect with like the Federation, and how does the Empire connect with the Federation, and like what were, because there was like a war prior to the story, and like how did the war shape the landscape and the way that, you know, these you know, territory lines were drawn out and stuff like that. And so even when I was creating the map, there are so fortunately enough, I had a good majority of the story written when I was creating the map. And so there are like scenes where I'm like, okay, this is a scene that happens at a lake, so I need to make sure that there is a lake on their way to Vol or whatever. So it's all like out of necessity essentially, and not because I'm just like making stuff up and pulling stuff out randomly essentially. But like, you start small, and then as you write your story, I think the world kind of grows with it, which is really nice. And it happened organically for me. So I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but that's kind of how I you know, that's kind of how I built my world up.
No, it definitely is something that when you're thinking about building a world, especially if it's in a fantasy setting or sci-fi or something that's out, like a little more outside of maybe a contemporary slice of life story,
Mm-hmm.
is you have a lot of components that need to work together. And I think that's a really cool skill to have, to be able to say the story went this way and the world was built this way because it needed to be, not because I said so.
Yeah,
Which I think
exactly.
is something that a lot of beginner creators maybe struggle with, especially if they are handling a story that is more complex and has a lot more world building into it. You really got to think about, like you said, this stuff happens because it needed to happen, not because I'm just throwing it in there.
Right, exactly. Like, oh, you know, I need a place called the Land of the Beginning because something in the narrative demands it, right? I don't want to spoil it, but like, you know what I mean? So that place was born because it's plot relevant, essentially.
I know
Yeah.
some creators or people may not know what software they should use.
Oh, sure.
So what software do you use to create the barrier scroll?
So this is where my workflow gets a little wonky. So everybody stop taking notes. So I do a significant portion of the illustration in Procreate. And that's mostly because I'm sitting at a desk all day, for my 9 to 5. So I don't necessarily love to stay at my desk for the rest of the time to work on the comic. So being on an iPad essentially allows me to be like mobile around the house. Like if I want to draw while I'm watching TV, or, while I'm traveling, I can take the iPad with me or whatever, which is really nice. So I do most of my rendering in Photoshop or Clip Studio. Essentially, I use all three. It's not a great workflow, but like Clip Studio has like really amazing brushes and really amazing assets, and they're just so powerful. But I'm just really fast in Photoshop. So when it comes to like lighting and stuff, I'll do a bunch of lighting in Photoshop. And then I use SketchUp for viewing, editing, or building 3D models. Because like we were talking about earlier, the world in this story is just so massive. So the 3D models, they really help me envision like how the characters are moving around in this like three-dimensional space. Like, so there's a scene where like the male lead Rin, he's like facing off with one of the antagonists, and they're like about to body each other. But I wanted the antagonist to look like even more menacing, right? So I made sure that he was like aligned with this huge bonfire behind him. So like sometimes I'll do blocking like in a 3D space, like very similar to how they do like blocking in theater, like in a theater or show or something. So I'll block out a scene to make sure that I'm like getting that, like that cinematic effect that I'm going for. And I want to make sure that like these spaces feel real, right? I want the characters to feel like they're really moving around in these areas. So like when the reader is taking in the story, it makes sense to them, like from a logic perspective. So like the big things are, Procreate, Adobe, Clip Studio, and then SketchUp, I think, are like the big ones that I use for software.
Yeah, I think there's benefits to using different softwares when you're creating. I don't think you have to be beholden to one or the other. Like I use SketchUp to pose all my backgrounds, and then Clip Studio to draw everything.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong software for creators to use. There's definitely maybe financial barriers to using
Yeah,
some,
sure.
like SketchUp is really expensive.
Yeah.
They have a iPad app. I think that's like $10 a month,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't really use really large model files in there. They have to be relatively small. And then I think Clip Studio isn't that expensive, but yeah, there's just, I mean, there could be those kinds of barriers to using certain softwares depending on somebody's financial
Yeah,
situation. There's a
totally.
lot of really great free softwares out there to use too. Like I started with Metabang Paint. It's free. It does the job. I think when people are thinking about, oh, what software should I use? What program what's the best one to draw? I think just go based off of maybe what your own preference would be, do some research. I personally think that Clip Studio is the best that I've used to create.
Like all around best. Like if you
Mhm.
wanted a little bit of everything, I agree. I
Yeah.
think Clip Studios, like if the best bang for your buck, essentially, right? Like if
Yeah.
you I think Clip Studio basically does everything that like, because I said I use Procreate and Photoshop and Clip Studio, but like you can really get all of that within Clip Studio if you wanted to. And you can have a way more streamlined workflow than I do, but I've kind of just fallen into that. But yeah, I agree. I think Clip Studio is probably your best bang for your buck.
Yeah. It definitely has more features and assets than Procreate does.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's why I only use Procreate for like drawing and line art essentially, and then I'll just import that in.
Yep.
It's a pretty wonky workflow. I just cannot sit at my desk for like more than 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
I'm already like a shrimp. I'm already shaped like a shrimp. So Anything
Yep.
I can do to like get out of the desk chair and stuff is works for me. So whatever works for you, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, what?
Okay.
So how did you plan the story for the barrier scroll? Were there resources that you used to help you write the story that helped?
Yes, absolutely. So there are a couple books that I swear by when it comes to story writing, and I know some people are like plotters and some people are pantsers. I'm definitely a plotter. I like to plan everything out. So each season in the Barrier Scroll uses the Save the Cat story structure. Have you heard of Save the
Yeah.
Cat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so if you don't know, the people listening, if you don't know what Save the Cat is, it's essentially like a 15-beat storytelling framework that like a lot of really popular novels use, movies use it too. I won't go into like crazy detail, but like, beat one would be like your opening act, beat two is like theme stated or something like that. Beat three is like setup, and then you have like catalyst, debate, blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of stuff in there. Highly recommend the book Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody if you are interested in learning more about this structure. She goes into super good detail about like how to use it. She gives specific examples from novels, the whole breakdown. Um, there's also like a similar take on Save the Cat, but it's for romance, and it's called Romancing the Beat. And I don't know if you've heard it. This book,
No.
yeah, it's called Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. I used this structure to organize the romantic arc between Oriole and Rin, because basically your main storyline should have arcs, right? Your character development should have arcs. But so too should like the romance in your story, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. And then like the way that I approach structuring episodes, that I absolutely adore, is so I took this, I stole this structure from Lisa Cron, who writes Story Genius. Write all these books down, or I can give you the links to them after this because they're all really good, and I like they're all dog-eared and well loved by me. But highly recommend these. So like Story Genius is the exact outline that I use for episodes when I write them. So, and I'll try to explain this the best that I can. But basically, it talks about like your story's third rail. That's what Lisa refers to it as, like your story's third rail. It could be like a lot of things. It's like your character's misbelief, I think, is like another way to put it. But basically, your story's third rail is essentially your protagonist's internal struggle, right? So, for example, with Oriole, it's always going to be about her like grappling with her self-worth and how she thinks like the Barry scroll is going to like solve all her problems essentially. So this third rail should always be what is driving the story forward. So every time you're writing an episode, you would want to ask yourself things like, why is this episode necessary? What is its main job, right? And then there's the breakdown of an episode. And in the book, it's like a diagram. So imagine, I wish I could whiteboard this for you, but like imagine you have this diagram, right? And it basically asks for the cause and effect of things like the plot and the third rail, right? So you're looking for the cause and the effect of the plot and the third rail. So for the plot, for example, you want to ask like, what happens in the scene? And then what are the consequences of that, right? For the third rail, you want to ask why what's happening matters and what is the realization that event triggers in the protagonist, right? And then that realization should trigger the very next thing that the protagonist does. I know it's like a lot. It's cause and effect, right? I'm oversimplifying it, but generally, you know, that's how the structure works. And it doesn't even it doesn't even need to be like a whoa, a gotcha moment, right? But it helps avoid a character that's like being dragged along by the plot, right? And you trend more towards a character that's driving the narrative instead. It just makes for like a better read, essentially. So basically you have like a scene by scene progression of like your external plot driven by the internal struggle that each event triggers in your protagonist, essentially. So there's I might have butchered that. There's a lot of story structures out there and they all have their pros and cons. I've just gone with the ones that make the most sense to me. So
Yeah,
that was a lot. I know.
no, you're fine. I honestly, I really want to check out those books for myself for sure.
Yes,
Those will
highly,
be really
highly
helpful.
recommend. You can
I
put them in the links down below.
I will put them in the links in the show notes. um, yeah, that's something that really bugs me about a lot of stories is that things seem to be happening around the main character, but they're not doing anything to drive the
Right,
plot forward. It's not a story that I can get really engrossed in because
right.
the main character isn't doing anything to
It's just like a rag doll.
yeah, like things happen to the main character and then it's that kind of storytelling where it's this happened and then this happened, but not this happened, therefore this had to happen.
Exactly, exactly. And it was really vital for me too because when I first wrote the first few episodes, like when I was still in the writing phase of this, when I hadn't even started on the comic yet, um, like because Oriole is going on an adventure, um, when I first wrote it, she was getting dragged by the
Mhm.
plot, you know, and
Yep.
it's like it's difficult because it's like, hey, we're going to go to point A to point B, and you're just coming along for the ride, Oriole. So it was very imperative to me that I made sure that Oriole was making all the executive decisions that influenced the path the party was going to take. I was very cognizant of that when I went back and reread it and got my hands on, Lisa's book. And I was like, holy crap, my poor protagonist is just not, she's a wet noodle and she's just being dragged along. So I wanted to give her more authority and more, say over um, the direction the plot was going, and it needed to be determined by her because she's the main character. So, um, just some good tips that I've kind of learned along the way. And when you start to learn about this stuff too, you start to see it in movies and shows and things that you really like, and you realize that the protagonist, at least for me, a lot of the stories and the movies that I adore are very much character driven plots rather than plots dragging the character along, essentially. And it's an easy mistake to make. So it's important to be aware of that when you start writing your story from the beginning.
So how can a creator recognize when they're maybe making those types of decisions for the story? How can they recognize if they are maybe not structuring it the way that a good story should be structured?
I mean, there's definitely stories out there that are not structured like Save the Cat. Maybe you're using like the hero's journey or something like that. There are other structures out there that work. And oftentimes people will write, like, I mentioned like pantsers and plotters earlier, but like, um, oftentimes people like pantsers will write something that they think is off the cuff, but it actually is following some structure of some sort, right? You kind of learn this in school and, when you first do like creative writing in school and stuff. So, um, I think that, I mean, one, you can just have other people read your work, people who you respect and are knowledgeable and know that they're going to give you like good criticism for the flow of your story. I think that's super important. I had people read my story in its infancy when I first started. Um, but make sure that make sure that the people that are reading it are not people that like really love and adore you because they're not going to be critical of your work.
Yeah.
That was a mistake of mine. Like everybody I talked to was like, "Oh yeah, this is really good," and I look at it and I start wrapping my head around some of these story structures and stuff, and I realized on my own that I was making a mistake, um, but only because it felt like when I was reading through it, it felt wrong to me. So like if you are writing, a piece of fiction or a piece of work, and something feels off to you, maybe dig in a little bit as to why that might be. There is some problem solving that I think you can do on your own, and then the stuff that you can't do on your own, like get somebody with a really good trained eye to look over your work for you. And I think there's even like resources online, like people can read your creative stories and stuff and tell you if it's janky or, you know, if it's good or needs some work or whatever. But you know, I guess my advice here would just be like, don't be in a silo, you know, and don't be afraid to like go back and fix things. Like I ended up rewriting a ton of stuff because once I realized that, you know, Oriole was being a wet noodle, I wanted to give her some agency back. And so I went back and I fixed it. So I think, you know, the blessing of the digital age is that even if we've put something online, we can always go back and fix it if we want. So I don't know. I guess that would be my advice there, is to just have other people check your work and then, you know, compare your work to story structures if it makes sense for you. But I'm not saying that people need to follow story structures. It's just you know, I love that stuff. So I'm all about it. And the story that I'm writing is pretty complicated. And not complicated from like a comprehension standpoint, but just complicated and like there's a lot of things happening and they all need to be plot relevant. And I need to make sure it's organized. And so a story structure helps me organize those thoughts in a way that's meaningful, essentially.
Yeah, I think those are really great pieces of advice for people who, you know, are thinking of starting a story or a webcomic or are in the process of it. I think those are really good pieces of advice. So do you have any maybe shortcuts or time-saving tips that have helped you when creating the barrier scroll?
Yeah, I mean, I use 3D models for backgrounds. We were talking about this earlier. I know some people feel some kind of way about 3D assets or backgrounds, but I personally love them. I think they, you know, I think they add to the story, not retract from them, especially when they're used right, you know, like when you really render them to make them feel integrated. It's just like, you know, we keep harping on world building. Like I'm doing so much world building that like I can't just be drawing every massive background and every panel forever. Like I'd never finish an episode, you know? But I also want to I want these worlds to feel real. I know that there are some web comics where it's like, you know, there's talking heads because maybe it's just like slice of life or whatever, and that's totally cool. I've chosen a route that I cannot back out of now, and so I need to like build these worlds and these spaces out in a way that makes sense so that the vastness of it feels, you know, realistic. And that's difficult for me to do if I have to draw like every single background. And like I said earlier, like I also block the characters out in the space. And I do a lot of depth of field on my panels too. And like, it's such a shame to like draw a background and just blur it.
Yeah.
Like I would feel so bad about that. So, you know, oftentimes I'm using 3D backgrounds, you know, for the world building, but I also use like 3D models to reference like crazy perspectives. You know, like how you can kind of look at like Clip Studio, like you were mentioning it earlier, has like where you can take a character and like set it up within a perspective and stuff. Like it's just like crazy perspectives that my brain cannot fathom on its own. So I have to look at something for like a reference or whatever. So yeah, I mean, and then like practice outside of your comic. Like I'm constantly doing exercises on like expressions, hands, shoes. Oh my god, I cannot draw shoes.
Shoes are so hard to draw.
Why are they so hard? I will draw a hand any day of the week, but please do not make me draw a tennis shoe. Oh my god.
They're so hard.
It's so hard. But like I think practicing outside of your comic will help you get faster. It's not really a shortcut. You're just getting better at doing something essentially. But I try to always do like studying. I study a lot of like lighting and composition. Like I said, I'm absolutely obsessed with cinematic lighting. I know I keep saying that. I'll just keep beating that horse. I'm always taking like screen caps from movies to give me ideas. And then like just be patient with yourself. Like everybody's workflow is different. You're going to get faster with time. You know, it just takes time. There's absolutely no way that you're going to get worse at something that you're literally doing like every single day, you know? and
Yep.
then keep track of your progress. Like one thing that I've been doing, and I've been sharing it online too, is like I'll go back to when I first started drawing like a couple years ago. I'll compare it to like a recent panel, and I'm even blown away by like my
Yeah.
progression.
Mhm.
I think it's really important to like be kind to yourself throughout the whole creative process. Some people are going to be really good at things, and other people are going to be a little slower at things, and so it's kind of just it's finding your groove and then figuring out what are the things that I need to work on to improve, essentially. So that's why I'm always like drawing expressions and hands and shoes.
Those damn shoes.
I know, gosh.
Yeah, I think that the self-compassion part is also a really important thing to have,
Yes.
because for beginners, they're gonna struggle with composition, story planning, drawing, where to post it, how to promote it. Like, there's a lot of steps that go into creating a webcomic and posting it online. And I think we can all get stuck in comparing ourselves to other creators. I still struggle with it. I struggle with it all the time. I compare myself to other people.
Oh,
But
me
I
too.
think that I think the self-compassion and giving yourself grace is really important, because hey, this is really hard.
Dude,
There's a lot of
yeah,
steps. There's so much work that goes into it.
it's like probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. Because you have to be a marketer, you have to be a photo director, you have to be a designer, you have to be, it's freaking it's like you have to be an amazing drawer and amazing storyteller. Like, what the heck? The heck?
Yeah.
And and sometimes it can be a little merciless out there, like it really can, and then you top that on how you treat yourself, and then compound that with social media, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it can get crazy. So it's like, for me, I think just like centering within the creative process, and I tell people all the time, I think maybe me and you have even had a chat about this, about like how just enjoying the creative process, I think, is like the most, for me, right? And I can only kind of speak about my perspective, but like, enjoying the creative process, I think, is a very rewarding part of the experience for me. Like,
Yeah.
I sort of wish there wasn't things like social media, or like even like posting the comic online to an audience that may or may not resonate with it, is, to me, absolutely terrifying. Like, I always have crazy anxiety when I'm about to post an episode, and I don't know if it's gotten better. If anything, I think it's gotten worse, because it's like the bigger your audience gets, the more eyes you get on yourself, and some of those eyes are a little critical. And when you're working with something that, at least for me, is very close to your heart. Like, these characters are very personal to me. The story is very personal to me. I don't know. I don't know if I would have taken that route, 2 or 3 years ago, but I'm here now. But it's like, it's very hard to kind of distance yourself between like the story and your self-worth, or your intrinsic value, essentially. Not to get, I don't want to get too deep here, but like, it can be tough. It's very brave, I would say, to create a story and put it out there for people to interpret in whatever way they wish to. Because once you release your story into the world, you have absolutely no control over how people react to it, or what they do with it, or, and to me, that's very terrifying. There have been many times where I have considered just stopping publishing, but continuing to work on the comic, because it's scary. So I think that, just giving yourself some credit, right, as to putting yourself out there, and it's raw, right? There's no other way to explain it. It's a very raw feeling to put your story out there. So I think you're already doing way more than most people are, and budding creators, and creators who've been doing this for a really long time should give themselves the credit they deserve, because it is a very brave thing to put your story and your creativity in the public eye.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. It can be very intimidating, and oftentimes scary thing to do, because this thing that you're creating is just so important to you and you have this personal attachment to it. If somebody's like, hey, this is the worst story I've ever read, it's stupid, but it still stings, right? It can still hurt. But I feel like if somebody isn't offering you a way to improve upon the art or the story, like if they are just being mean, you could even just delete their comment. You can do that on Webtoon. You can delete their comment and you can block them.
It's true.
You can just
You can.
just end it there and not have to deal with it anymore. It's to just save yourself the peace of mind. And if you're getting mean comments or hateful comments or whatever from people who aren't even offering up a way to improve, you could just delete their comments and be done with it. You know, save yourself the stress, and you don't have to take it.
Yep, that's really good advice. And the flip side too, right? To put a positive spin on it too, because I've been at both ends of the spectrum. I've had people be really, really cruel, and I've had people just be like some of the most amazing people that I've ever met have reached out because my comic has resonated with them in some way. And so whenever the positive comes through, which fortunately for me nowadays is more frequent than the negativity, or at least I will say is louder than the negativity, because I don't allow the negativity to have as loud a voice as the positivity. One thing that I do is I will take screenshots of just people being the kindest human beings, like some of the kindest human beings I've ever met, I have connected with through this comic. And I keep those little conversations for me, for myself, in a Notion that I can look at. And usually I look at these on I actually wrote a blog post about this, but usually I look at these on days where I'm feeling a little low, because I will say that the creator process of a webtoon specifically is very roller coastery. It's not a word, but it is now. But it's you have your really high highs and then your really low lows, and then I had a day where somebody was a huge jerk, and then somebody else did a cosplay of Oriole the same day. And it was, those were
I saw that
extreme.
One. I saw that one. It was amazing.
Absolutely gorgeous. And it was that happened on the same day. And I'm just how am I supposed to feel? You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
So you really do have to try to focus on the positive. It does not matter how good your comic is. It does not matter how well written it is. Honestly, it doesn't even matter how bad your comic is. The objectivity doesn't matter. People are going to say what they want to say about your work, right? Because it's online, right? And there's nothing you can do about it. But focusing on the positive, I think, has helped me reframe my headspace in a way that allows me to continue working on this with a continued sense of joy.
Yeah.
Because the comic process really does, I'm so stoked about it. I just absolutely love working on it. And don't let anybody take that away from you. You know what I mean? that is yours. You own that is yours. And the minute you kind of give into the negativity is the minute that they win, And you never hear, and I'll say this and then I'll stop, because we could talk about, there's a whole other podcast. So you're never going to get negativity and criticism from artists and creators and creatives who are doing really amazing stuff, right? The people who you look up to, the people who you aspire to be like, who you want your work to be like, those people are never the people who are trying to bring you down. You know what I mean? So it kind of says something about the type of feedback that is solicited. And so that's kind of something that I take with me as I'm on this journey and doing this stuff, right? That, the negativity is never coming from the top,
Mm-hmm. I've always had creators that I really look up to. They are always really nice about, they'll message me oh my gosh, I love this last chapter, or they'll leave comments on Webtoon on the episode. And I think I don't want to frame it in a way where people are thinking that, oh, there's going to be a ton of negativity if you publish your webcomic online. Like, in my experience, most people that I talk to are just so positive
Yeah,
and
are kind.
just so
Yeah, absolutely.
kind and supportive. Like, it was really it was really lonely in the beginning when I didn't have the community that I have now, and I'm really grateful for it. And there's a lot of positivity, you know. Um Try to connect with other creators because they're in the same
Yes.
boat.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have nobody to vent to, like reach out to me. I will
Yeah,
respond. I
DMJ.
respond. Yeah, DM me. I will give you the whole spiel and I will be in your corner for sure.
Yeah,
Like if you just have nobody, because you're totally right. When you first start out, it is lonely. It's just you and your comic, right? And there's no life support. You build that as you go. Please DM me if you are feeling like you need someone to have your back. I'll be that person for you. I promise. Because
that's really
I didn't
kind of
I
you.
didn't have that. I did not have that first starting out. Eventually I got it, and I have met some amazing people that honestly, some of these people are like single-handedly have kept me doing this.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure that I would still be doing this today if it weren't for like that support system. So start building that. Absolutely. Connect with the creators that mean something to you, right? Connect with the people that you vibe with,
Yeah,
those are your people. You need that, I think, everybody needs that support system for sure.
yeah. And you have your own website for the Barrier Scroll. Has publishing there kind of helped you with maybe having more support with the website? Is it helping you with engagement?
I love this question because this is actually a topic that I'm super duper passionate about. But let me caveat first with the fact that I do, like you said, like there are sites like Webtoon and Tapas that can be super instrumental in building an audience. Like those places have the readers and the people who are ready to take in your story, right? That is a fact. Nobody discredits that. However, however, I am a huge advocate of building your house on your own land, right? Having your own site ensures that you own that audience and are essentially not reliant on third-party platforms. And I'll explain why. So you get freedom over your content, essentially. You can, so these are things that you can't usually traditionally do on third-party sites. And I'm just generalizing because I know that sites like Webtoon, for example, do let you link to your Patreon and stuff. But like overall, if you have your own website, you can show your own Patreon, you can sell merch, you can share exclusive content. I have everything from blog posts to lore on there. I post my episodes on the platform, or sorry, on my website as well. And so I'm able to do things like add music to accompany the
Which is
episodes.
so cool, by the way.
I love it. I love it.
It's amazing.
I've had a lot of readers tell me that they prefer this like richer experience because I know like originals you can have music, but
Hmm.
Canvas you cannot. And so I absolutely adore picking music. I do like royalty-free music. I'm not just like pulling from the
Yeah.
internet, but
Yeah.
please don't do that. But I do. I enjoy the richer experience. I think it adds a little more to like the fantasy vibe and stuff. And I've had people tell me that they prefer it on the website,
Yeah.
which is really good. Some other things are like you don't have any like platform restrictions. So like for example, like some platforms have very strict content guidelines.
Hmm.
I won't go into detail on what that could potentially
Yeah.
mean. I think people know when to pick up, but like for example,
Yeah.
so like one of my most recent episodes, there's a scene where Oriole is taking a bath. You are usually naked when you're taking a bath. It's a classy scene, right? But like I had to make some edits to it for Webtoon to make sure like I didn't get dinged,
Yeah.
essentially,
Hmm.
But the original piece is on my website, like in all its glory on how it's intended. So to
Hmm.
me, that just feels better, like
Yeah.
creatively, Um, like another thing is like you're not at the mercy of like platform changes. You and I were talking about this earlier, but um like if the TikTok shutdown, not so shutdown, has taught us anything, right? It's that like Webtoon or Tapas or some other third-party platform, like if they change policies or shut down, your audience disappears with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important to understand. What's another, like, I would say that my website makes my comic feel more official, right? So it's better for branding, it's better for like reader loyalty, right?
Oh yeah.
Like I've had a lot of readers tell me they prefer the website experience because they can reference things like lore. I mentioned that I have the maps on there.
Yeah.
So
I was checking it out.
Oh yeah, cool. Cool. And there's like character bios on there. Like I have a lot of people will ask me questions like, how old is Oriole? Like how tall is Rin? And I'm like, look at their bios on the website. It's all there. Setting up a newsletter, in fact, is one thing.
I subscribed to your newsletter.
Yeah, amazing. So this is one thing I wish I did not sleep on. Like I set one up last year and I was absolutely floored by the response. So like on Webtoon, I believe that I have notifications turned off, but like if you sub to a comic and then they release a new episode, you get like a notification essentially. So the newsletter is a way for me to let readers know who are interested because they're opting in essentially when a new episode comes out. And I was just blown away by how many people really wanted these notifications. Because I personally don't want anything more in my email addresses, but since my release schedule is a little more lengthy than others, and I don't really have a specific day because I try to be kind to myself on my release schedule, the emails allow people to know when a new episode is coming. But I can also, now that I have these emails, I can do things like if I wanted to, I don't want to bother people, but like if I ever wanted to run a Kickstarter or something, or if I ever wanted to.
You already had those leads or the contacts.
Exactly. So I totally recommend that you do this like day one, the day one of making a website, essentially. That's what I mean. I just feel like for me, the website is a destination for an audience that doesn't use third-party platforms. Like a lot of my audience trends a little more mature, I think. So I get a lot of readers from like Book Talk and Bookstagram. And those communities aren't necessarily on like comic sites. In fact, like I was actually evaluating the traffic and views between like Webtoon and my website. And I would say that the traffic to my site is now on par with the traffic to my Webtoon page.
Wow.
And it's
That's
trending.
Amazing.
I know. I was kind of blown away by this. I was looking at it back in January. And it's trending to like overtake that traffic by the end of the year for sure, if not in the next 6 months. So there is definitely a demand to view your comic in places other than Webtoons and stuff. So definitely build a house on your own land. And I don't know if this is like unique to me, right? Because like I said, my audience might be a little different. They're older, they're more mature, they're maybe not locked into like comic reading sites and stuff like that. But it's always just nice to have your comic in a place that you own and control. Like I can't stress that enough. I mean, it helps that I have like a background in design and I can like shoot a website up really quick and stuff. But there are, for maybe people who aren't as tech savvy with websites and stuff, you can do like there's like Wix sites and there's a couple of other ones that you can just pop up really quickly and start to post your comic there and stuff. So I am a huge proponent of building your own website for sure.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, especially you never know if those platforms will be around forever, right? And I think it's definitely beneficial, especially when you can control the content. You're not beholden to a certain platform's policies and things, so you can post the type of content you want to post. And I was reading the barrier scroll on your website, and the music just added so much to it. It was just so nice. Like you can set the tone.
I know, it's so good.
It just fits so well. And I was checking out the lore and all the character profiles, and I was like, I'm going to sign up for her newsletter.
Yeah. See, it works. It totally works. And I update that stuff all the time. Like when there's a new character out. So like I recently announced a new character that's going to be in the next episode. Her name is Kazrel. Her profile's already up on the website. I don't know how hardcore people are about checking that stuff out, but like I'm pretty good at keeping it up to date as far as like new lore is concerned and stuff like that. And there's even like Easter eggs in there and stuff that y'all, I don't know if y'all are picking it up, but like there's a whole lore segment about artifacts. It gets really nerdy, but I love it. There's like a whole section about like the Wandering Stone necklace that Rin actually hasn't even given Oriole yet. But there's some juicy bits in there. That's all I'm saying. So,
I love it.
so people should go and read that stuff because I enjoy writing it. This is all lore that I make up. And not necessarily lore that you'll get in the story, right? It's not like I'm going to be like, and here is the lore for this necklace, right? It's going to be told in the story in some way. But it's kind of nice to see it all, I don't know, like gaming style or something. Like here's all the things a necklace can do, and and here's the communication rune. This is what communication runes can do and stuff like that. So it's kind of just like an additional I don't know, like compendium for the story and stuff. So if you're really into the lore and the characters and stuff, I have all of that fun stuff on the website.
Yeah. And how can people find your website?
Ooh, it is really easy to remember. It's thebarrierscroll.com.
Excellent. Yeah, everyone can go check out thebarrierscroll.com. Go subscribe to her newsletter. The website is beautiful. I love all of the work that you put into it. It's just so nice.
Oh,
the designer in me is just really appreciating the website.
Ooh, and the designer in me appreciates that the designer in you appreciates the website.
So what can we expect maybe in the next 5 years? Like what can we expect with the Barrier Scroll, and maybe what plans you might have after you finish the Barrier Scroll?
In the next 5 years. I don't even know what I'm having for lunch today. But like I would say just continued work on the Barrier Scroll, because like I said, I'm releasing monthly. I don't know if that frequency will ever increase. I'd love it to. It's just I really want this to be like a sustainable endeavor, like long into the future, right? Could I release faster episodes? Probably. I just don't know how long I would want to be able to do that. And like this story is really long. So I think the next 5 years or 10 years or whatever are going to be really filled with just like, wonderful, wonderful storytelling. Like there's a lot of moments I'm super extremely excited for. Like I can't wait to share. I'm very chomping at the bit with these moments. Like
love it.
And I hope like my art and storytelling get better, right? I think, a huge and unanticipated result of this webtoon was just being so engrossed in the creative process. I know we've hit on that a couple of times, but like I was not expecting to adore learning new things and new processes and like new ways of drawing and new ways of setting up panels. And so I just love seeing my work get better. I love seeing like the mutuals that are around me, seeing their work get better and everybody just kind of rising to the top at the same time. I think it's just so rewarding, like if you put in the time and I don't know, just be present in like the metamorphosis that happens, right, with creating a webtoon. So I have nothing but love for the experience, and it's like where I put a good portion of my heart into. And like I don't know, honest to goodness, if the Barrier Scroll was the project that I had to work on for like my life, I really couldn't think of a better way of spending my time.
Oh, that's really cute.
It's really cheesy, but it's true.
I love it.
It's true. I adore this story. I absolutely adore it.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing I try to tell other people who are wanting to start a webcomic is make sure it's a story that you love, because like how would you want to stick with it if you don't love the story?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like I don't get paid for this. Basically, it's not, I don't make money off of this comic. I don't have a Patreon. This isn't my full-time job. I do this purely for the love, purely for the passion. So, I don't know. I'm not thinking about like, what am I going to grow my subs to, or what, I think goals like that are fine and everything, but I just want to keep connecting with people. I want to keep tapping into like those universal emotions that everybody has, you know. And I think just the connections, I know you know this too, right? The connections that you're making with like audiences and storytelling are just so, you know, that's what I want to keep doing.
All right, Jay, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today and just to learn more about you and just, getting into the process. It was an honor. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure, and let's do it again tomorrow.
Okay, everybody, I will include Jay's links in our show notes. You can go subscribe to her webcomic on Webtoon. You can go to her website and look at all the other cool stuff that she's got. She has lore, she has amazing merch and jewelry and like cool little trinkets on her website. You can go check it out there. Go sign up for her newsletter. She's got fun little perks with it. And you can follow her on Instagram at the Barrier Scroll. So if you found this episode informative or entertaining, give us a like, give us a follow. You can find us on our socials at the Webtoon Wave. We are on Instagram, we are on TikTok. You can listen to us on Spotify and watch us on YouTube. We post full-length episodes and clips just in case you like the shorter content there. So stay creative, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time.